Could I just ask a little bit more about the medicines you're talking about that might be useful in Stargardt? There's oral tablets that somehow might benefit people by interacting with the visual cycle.
So yes, there's a number of opportunities here, but I think we're yet to realise specific trials. But knowing what the gene does and what the protein does, it's involved in this visual cycle. And so one logical thing to do, and I think this has been tried in the mouse model of Stargardt disease, is to slow down the visual cycle so that the proteins that are involved in it, such as ABCA4, have less work to do. And so for someone with a relatively mild form of the disorder, that might potentially slow down the problem. So that sort of drug might work. Other drugs might look at the way the cells are, the toxicity happens through lack of ABCA4. So one of the problems we think that's going on in the photoreceptor cells is that this chromophore that reacts to light, retinal, isn't detoxified quickly enough, and it forms other compounds, and it has a toxic effect on the native molecules of the cell. And so there are strategies to try and improve the detoxification of these waste products that otherwise have a very slow effect on photoreceptors. And there may be many other routes by which drugs could help the disorder. And I think this needs a dialogue, a close dialogue between drug companies, persuading drug companies that rare disorders are worth chasing. That's one hurdle we have, that they see Stargardt disease as a rare thing, whereas age-related macular disease is a common thing. Let's treat the common thing because we're a drug company and we're going to get profit from that. That is an issue. And I know the NIHR, for instance, have put a fair amount of money into rare disease research to try and address that issue and to help the dialogue between drug companies, scientists and clinicians in rare disease.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Hello, my name is Odette Batwell and I've got Stargardt's, and I wanted to know, occasionally I see a kind of a purple flash and I also see sparkly dots, and I kind of don't know what it is, what causes it, and I don't know if other people who have Stargardt's also see those things.
Andrew.
So I see a lot of folks, and I hear that story an awful lot, and it's a very common symptom in Stargardt disease and other retinal disorders. And what we think is happening, a colleague of mine called Dominic Fitch talks about this. He's now a consultant psychiatrist, but he did a lot of work on this phenomenon in which people with retinal problems, including common ones like age-related macular disease, as well as Stargardt disease, see things that aren't in the world. And the things that they see are most often lights, just as you've described, sparkly lights, roving lights, disco lights, and sometimes they can be formed images of things that they recognise as a person or an object. And so that's quite a common thing, and we think it's due to the fact that the visual cortex isn't receiving the input from the visual system that it is used to, and so it engages in an intrinsic activity which is perceived by the person as light, because when anything happens in that part of the brain, it's thought of as light. And that can be a major problem for some people, and it's very difficult to treat. That's an issue for us. We're not very good at treating that when it becomes intrusive. All we do say is that it's a random symptom. It isn't related to the severity of the disorder, and usually, eventually, it gets better and goes away, but it can last for many years. That's a good question, and it's difficult still to understand how the spelling mistakes relate to the condition and to think about how it's going to go in the future. Although we're starting to do that. One of the challenges is that there are so many different ways this gene can go wrong. And so it's a triumph really confirming that it is that. That helps already. The family then know what they're dealing with. They know to come to patient days like this, know where to look for research. They know that it's recessive and what the risks are. So benefits already accrue from knowing that. But we are getting better at understanding the severity. And also in the future, in a generation's time, and you'll hear later in the session, there will be attempts to treat this, and that may depend upon the specific spelling mistake. So it is worth knowing. But it is difficult reading the runes and knowing how that will relate to the person. There's a lot of variability still in the disorder.
Thank you. You had a question, sir?
Sorry, this might seem a bit low grade in comparison. Excuse me. Carrots and sunglasses. Vitamin A, we were told, was something to avoid, and also this thing about sunglasses. I mean, I don't joke about sunglasses, but I'm trying to understand how much of an impact that actually genuinely has or doesn't have.
So, yeah, this advice we give in clinic, we say 4 things really. Don't smoke, or you tell anyone not to smoke. Have a healthy diet, or you tell anyone that. But we also they say those 2 things, and that stems from the research on the mouse model. So the mouse has had its gene knocked out, and that actually happened before the gene was found. It's not a great model because the mouse doesn't have a macula. Neither does it have many cones. It's a nocturnal animal, very few cones, no macula. So when you knock it out in a mouse, it doesn't mind that much, which isn't good for us because we want to study the disorder. But what it does tell us a bit about is the biochemistry, and what it has shown is that light worsens the condition. You're putting stress on a system which is having to regenerate this molecule, and that's what ABCA4 does. So that makes logical biochemical sense as well. And empirically in the mouse, there's a really nice paper that showed that. And the same goes for vitamin A. Vitamin A is the thing that needs to be recycled, and if you load the system with vitamin A, at least in the mouse, it seems to make it worse. So that's reasonable advice to beware of very bright light. Computers are fine, assistive technology is all fine, but probably the photon rain from direct sunlight may not be fine. And not to take expensive tablets that people, we're bombarded with, encouraged to take vitamin supplements, aren't we? We don't need to, and they contain vitamin A, and so it's best just to have a healthy diet. So that's where that advice comes from.
Jim, can I just mention about sunglasses? So there's 2 issues with sunglasses, one of which, as Andrew said, is protection against UV. People get worried about what type of sunglasses a lot of the time, but any CE marked sunglasses, any sunglasses you buy anywhere properly, will block all the UV light. So it doesn't really matter what type of lens it is from that point of view. You don't have to spend lots of money on sunglasses. In terms of what colour, in terms of helping people's vision, we often find people like brown as opposed to grey sunglasses. It varies between people a lot. The reason for that being it blocks out a bit more of the blue light, and the blue end of the spectrum is what causes glare and scatter of the light. And as an extension of that, some people like yellow lenses, which does the same thing. It blocks out the blue light. It doesn't block out so much useful light, but it does stop blue light scattering. But there's no way of saying you're somebody who would like this, you're somebody who would like that. It's just worth trying. But those 3 colours tend to be helpful, either grey, brown or yellow tend to be preferred. Yellow or orange.
Thank you. That's really helpful advice. So we have time for one final question.
A question for Michael. All of the assistive technologies that you mentioned, and you mentioned on the last slide about getting help, getting those, is the pathway to those help simply a diagnosis? Once you've got a diagnosis, can you go to these places, the charities, the clinics, and say, here is my diagnosis, I need this help? Is that all I need, all they need, or do they have to be reassessed and, oh no, you're only this type and not that type?
It's a good question, and we do of course see people in the clinic who we don't know what's wrong with them. We know they have poor vision, they don't have a diagnosis, and those people are still entitled to help. If you're able to be registered as sight impaired or severely sight impaired, that also helps. It often gives added weight to an application, but generally you don't need those things. These are based on need as opposed to specific diagnoses or specific registration statuses. So, for example, in the classroom, a teacher with vision impairment will be involved if a health professional refers you to that scheme, and then they will look at your performance in the classroom and make recommendations based on that. So yes, a diagnosis helps, being registered will help, but it's not essential for any of these things.